Hey Angel Casey, I care enough about you to bring to your awareness that perfectionism can lead to a range of negative side effects. And if you're thinking, nah, that's not me, I'm not a perfectionist, stick around. Because sometimes perfectionism whispers instead of shouts, and it disguises itself as a desire for excellence. But here's the thing, it's a bit of a wolf in sheep's clothing. See, true excellence is about striving, growing, and embracing the journey. Perfectionism, on the other hand, is about the impossible. It's this fixed destination where you never really arrive, and the pressure of that, it can be seriously damaging. We're not talking about just pushing yourself to be your best here. We're talking about a mindset that can really mess with your mental health, your relationships, even your physical well-being. So, over the next few minutes, we're going to dive into some of the hidden dangers of perfectionism. We'll explore how it can manifest in our lives, and most importantly, we'll arm ourselves with some tools to combat it. Because you deserve to live a life that's full of joy, authenticity, and yes, even mistakes. Because let's be real, mistakes are where the real learning happens, right? Okay, let's talk about anxiety, because one of the biggest side effects of perfectionism is this constant nagging feeling of worry. It's like there's this voice in your head that just won't quit, always whispering about what could go wrong, how you're not good enough, how you're going to mess everything up. And that voice, it feeds off of unrealistic standards. You set the bar so impossibly high that it becomes almost impossible to reach, let alone clear. So you're stuck in this cycle of striving and never quite arriving, and that gap between where you are and this imaginary perfect place. That's where anxiety thrives. It can manifest in all sorts of ways, from that constant low-level hum of worry to full-blown panic attacks. You might find yourself overthinking every little decision, second-guessing yourself, or even avoiding situations altogether because you're so afraid of failing. But here's the thing about anxiety. It often disguises itself as productivity. You tell yourself that you're just being detail-oriented or driven, but deep down, it's that fear of not being good enough that's driving the bus. So how do we quiet that anxious voice? Well, that's something we'll be exploring throughout this video. But for now, just know this: you're not alone in this. Anxiety is a very real and very treatable condition, and there's no shame in reaching out for help if you need it. So we've talked about the anxiety that often accompanies perfectionism, but it doesn't stop there. Perfectionism can also pave the way for something even heavier, depression. And I know that's a big word, but it's important to talk about. See, when you're constantly striving for this unattainable ideal, this version of yourself that doesn't actually exist, it's incredibly easy to fall into a pattern of negative self-talk and self-criticism. Every perceived failure, every time you don't meet your own impossible standards, it chips away at your self-worth. And over time, those feelings of inadequacy can become so overwhelming that they start to color everything. You might lose interest in things you used to enjoy, feel hopeless about the future, or even withdraw from your relationships. It's like you're trapped in this echo chamber of your own negative thoughts, and it can feel impossible to break free. But here's the thing, depression is not a sign of weakness, it's not something you choose, and it's definitely not something you can just snap out of. It's a serious mental health condition that requires professional help. So, if you're struggling with depression, please know that you don't have to go through this alone. We've talked about anxiety, we've talked about depression, and now I want to touch on something that's closely intertwined with both self-esteem. Because perfectionism has this nasty habit of chipping away at our sense of self-worth, leaving us feeling inadequate and insecure. When you're constantly judging yourself against these unrealistic standards, it's easy to lose sight of your accomplishments, your strengths, your inherent value as a human being. You start to focus solely on your flaws, on the things you haven't done, on the ways you don't measure up, and that constant self-criticism. It's toxic. It erodes your confidence, makes it hard to celebrate your successes, and leaves you feeling like you're never quite good enough. It's like you're standing in front of a funhouse mirror, constantly distorting your perception of yourself. But here's the truth. You are worthy of love and belonging just as you are. You don't have to be perfect to be deserving of happiness. In fact, it's often our imperfections, our quirks, our vulnerabilities that make us so uniquely wonderful. Okay, let's shift gears a little and talk about relationships, because perfectionism doesn't just impact us internally, it can also wreak havoc on our connections with others. When you're caught in the grip of perfectionism, it's easy to project those unrealistic standards onto the people around you. You might find yourself becoming overly critical of your partner, your friends, even your family members. And while it might come from a place of wanting the best for them, that kind of constant criticism can be incredibly damaging. It creates distance, breeds resentment, and makes it difficult for people to feel truly seen and accepted for who they are, flaws and all. And it's not just about being critical of others. Perfectionism can also make it hard to let people in, to be vulnerable, to allow ourselves to be loved and supported for who we truly are. We're so afraid of being judged, of not measuring up, that we build walls around our hearts, pushing away the very people who care about us most. Building on that idea of relationships, I want to talk about something that's often really hard to talk about: intimacy. And I'm not just talking about physical intimacy here, but emotional intimacy as well. Because perfectionism can create real barriers to experiencing deep, meaningful connections with others. When you're so caught up in the pursuit of perfection, it's easy to develop this fear of vulnerability. You might be afraid to let your guard down, to show your true self, to reveal your flaws and imperfections. And that fear, it can be paralyzing. It can prevent you from forming close friendships, from pursuing romantic relationships, even from experiencing the full depth of connection with the people you already have in your life. Because true intimacy requires authenticity. It requires letting go of the masks we wear and allowing ourselves to be seen, flaws and all. But when you're constantly striving for perfection, it's like you're holding yourself back from experiencing one of the most beautiful and rewarding parts of being human. All right, let's talk about something we can probably all relate to: procrastination. It's the ultimate productivity killer, right? But here's the thing: procrastination isn't always about laziness. In fact, it can often be a symptom of perfectionism. Think about it. When you're terrified of failing, when you feel like you have to do something perfectly or not at all, it's easy to get stuck in a cycle of procrastination. You put things off, not because you don't care, but because the pressure to get it right, to make it perfect, is just too overwhelming. So you end up in this vicious cycle. You procrastinate because you're afraid of not being perfect, and then you beat yourself up for procrastinating, which just reinforces those feelings of inadequacy and fear of failure. It's a recipe for stress, anxiety, and a whole lot of unfinished tasks. But there's hope. Overcoming procrastination, especially when it's rooted in perfectionism, is totally possible. It's about challenging those all-or-nothing thoughts, breaking down tasks into smaller, more manageable steps, and focusing on progress over perfection. We've talked about anxiety, procrastination, and now I want to touch on something that's closely related to both: overthinking. Because when you're a perfectionist, your mind can become this endless labyrinth of what-ifs and should-haves. You replay past conversations in your head, agonizing over every little detail, wondering if you said the right thing, if you could have done something differently. You analyze every decision to death, weighing the pros and cons until you're paralyzed by indecision. And you know what? All that overthinking, it's exhausting. It drains your energy, steals your joy, and prevents you from being present in the moment. It's like you're stuck in this mental hamster wheel, running and running, but never actually getting anywhere. But here's the thing: you don't have to live in your head all the time. You can train your mind to be more present, to focus on the here and now, to let go of those intrusive thoughts that keep you trapped in the past or worrying about the future. Let's talk about feedback, because for a lot of us, receiving feedback, especially when it's not glowing praise, can be tough. But for perfectionists, it can feel like a punch in the gut. And I get it. When you're so invested in being perfect, when your sense of self-worth is so closely tied to your accomplishments, any kind of criticism, even if it's constructive, can feel like a personal attack. It triggers those feelings of inadequacy, those fears of not being good enough. And so you might find yourself getting defensive, shutting down, or even dismissing feedback altogether. But here's the thing: feedback is a gift. It's an opportunity to learn, to grow, to become even better at whatever it is you're doing. The key is to learn how to receive feedback without letting it crush your spirit. It's about separating your self-worth from your accomplishments, understanding that you can be both a work in progress and a valuable, worthy human being at the same time. Okay, we've talked a lot about the mental and emotional toll of perfectionism, but I want to take a moment to talk about the physical impact, because all that pressure to be perfect, it doesn't just stay in your head. It manifests in your body too. Headaches, muscle tension, digestive issues, these are all common physical symptoms of stress, and perfectionism is a major stressor. When you're constantly in overdrive, pushing yourself to meet these unrealistic standards, your body goes into fight or flight mode. Your heart rate and blood pressure increase, your muscles tense up, and your digestion slows down. And if you ignore these signals for too long, it can lead to more serious health problems down the road. So pay attention to what your body is telling you. If you're experiencing chronic headaches, muscle tension, or digestive issues, it could be a sign that you need to slow down, prioritize self-care, and find healthier ways to manage stress. So we've talked about how perfectionism can manifest in anxiety, depression, relationship problems, even physical health issues. But there's another area where it can wreak havoc: sleep. Because if you're a perfectionist, chances are your mind doesn't just shut off when your head hits the pillow. Instead, it's like your brain decides to hold a late-night brainstorming session, replaying every perceived mistake, every unfinished task, every worry and insecurity that's been swirling around in your head all day. And you know what? That's not exactly conducive to a restful night's sleep. So you might find yourself tossing and turning, struggling to fall asleep, or waking up in the middle of the night with your mind racing. And chronic sleep deprivation, it's not just about feeling tired. It can impact your mood, your concentration, your immune system, even your long-term health. We've covered a lot of ground, but there's one more hidden danger of perfectionism that I want to address: burnout. Because when you're constantly operating in overdrive, pushing yourself to meet these impossible standards, it's only a matter of time before you hit a wall. Burnout is more than just feeling tired or stressed. It's a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion that can leave you feeling depleted, cynical, and completely overwhelmed. It's like you've been running a marathon without ever stopping to catch your breath, and eventually your body and mind just can't keep up. And the thing is, burnout doesn't just impact your work life. It spills over into every area of your life, affecting your relationships, your health, your overall well-being. So if you're feeling burned out, it's important to take a step back, reassess your priorities, and make some changes to create a more sustainable pace. Okay, we've talked about a lot of the negative consequences of perfectionism, but I want to end on a more hopeful note, because here's the thing: overcoming perfectionism isn't just about reducing stress or improving your sleep. It's about unlocking a whole new level of freedom, creativity, and joy in your life. See, perfectionism holds us back. It keeps us small and safe, afraid to step outside of our comfort zones, to try new things, to risk failure. But when we can let go of the need to be perfect, when we can embrace the messy, imperfect beauty of being human, that's when the real magic happens. We're free to experiment, to take risks, to pursue our passions without the fear of not being good enough holding us back. We open ourselves up to new experiences, new connections, new possibilities that we never even imagined before. So, Angel, we've covered a lot of ground here, from anxiety and depression to relationship struggles and burnout. And it might feel kind of heavy, all these hidden dangers lurking beneath the surface of something that's often praised as a positive trait. But here's the thing I want you to take away from this video: you are not alone. Perfectionism is incredibly common, especially in our culture of constant comparison and achievement. But it doesn't have to rule your life. There are things you can do to challenge those perfectionistic tendencies, to cultivate self-compassion, to embrace the messy, imperfect beauty of being human. And those things, they're worth fighting for, because a life lived in pursuit of perfection is a life half lived.